Good afternoon, Salam Alaikum, and Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you all for giving us some of your time out of this day, inshallah, as we start the blessed last 10 days of Ramadan. We have a very interesting lineup all set for you. Today, the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, is releasing our annual Civil Rights Report. So we will have Amar Ansari from our research and advocacy team run you through the findings of that report. The other thing that we're doing today is we're releasing the findings of data analysis that was conducted on the 2019 watch list, a copy of which CAIR got after a regional air carrier put it online where anyone could access it, which just simply reflects one of the concerns we've raised about the watch list for years. So we'll have one of our staff attorneys step in and present that information to you. And then we're really excited that we have Dr. Hatem Bazian and Dalia Mogahed with us as well to sort of give us their thoughts on the report, particularly from their areas of expertise. So it's not just going to be the sliver of the civil rights that CAIR sees. It's going to be a much broader range of topics that we can talk about because we have these two expert guests who've kindly agreed to join us. We're going to dive right into the material for you now. I'm going to introduce Amar Ansari. He is the Research and Advocacy Coordinator with CAIR's Research and Advocacy Department. There you go. And he's going to talk about the report for you. Take it away, Amar.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much, Corey. So my name is Amar Ansari. Corey and I have been working on the brand new Civil Rights Report here at CAIR National. And the title of our Civil Rights Report is called Progress in the Shadow of Prejudice. Now, we have chosen this title because it illustrates a new development that we are seeing concerning the state of anti-Muslim incidences in America. And CAIR has been documenting this as part of its work. Now, CAIR has recorded complaints since 1995. And since then, we have seen a steady increase in the total number of complaints that the national office and the chapters receive. But what is very important to note is that for the first time, we're seeing the first recorded decline in 2022. This is encouraging, but we need to remind everyone that this is not a problem solved. It's a glimmer of hope. What this means is that we should double down on our efforts to advocate, legislate, and litigate as part of our work here at CAIR. Moving on to the next slide. In total, in 2022, CAIR has received 5,156 cases. Now, when we look at the data, the top categories in which we see these complaints coming in are immigration and asylum cases, employment discrimination, incarceratory rights, and school incidences. Now, there could be a number of reasons that could explain why these are the top categories for this year. For example, in the case of immigration and asylum, we're still seeing the rollover of the Biden withdrawal from Afghanistan. And a lot of our chapters have been working on immigration and asylum cases pertaining to that. In the case of incarceratory rights, every year in Ramadan, we always have to remind prisons across the country to uphold a constitutional right for Muslim prisoners to practice their religion, whether that be congregating in prayer or breaking their fast on time as part of Ramadan. To move on to the next slide, what's very important when we talk about the data is that we need to talk about nuances. That's why for our new Civil Rights Report, we decided to change up some of the categories. For example, law enforcement and government overreach was one category in our 2021 report. Now in our new report, we have created 3 categories pertaining to that category. 1, law enforcement encounters with 145 cases. The second one being FBI interrogations with 128 cases, and other discrimination that may not fit the previous 2 categories at 136. When we compile the data together, what is encouraging to see is that we are seeing a 38% decline in law enforcement and government overreach cases. Now, what could explain this decline? 1, the change in the White House may explain something. When we saw that the first year of Trump administration brought a 32% increase, we're now seeing a return to the baseline of what it was pre-Trump. Another reason could be the January 6th insurrection. As we all know, white supremacists and anti-government groups enjoyed political cover for the longest time. Now, after January 6th, it is possible that the targeting of law-abiding Muslims may have reduced as the DOJ and the Homeland Security are putting more of an increased effort to combat white supremacists. Now, another category we want to talk about is school incidences. For 2022, we have divided up into two different categories, one for bullying and one for education discrimination. An example of education discrimination, for example, would be if Islamophobic content was presented in a classroom. When we look at the data, this is very disturbing. What we're seeing is an increase of cases regarding school incidences. In 2021, it was 177 cases. Last year, 289 cases. This is a 63% jump in cases regarding to an educational setting. And this is quite disturbing. Now, what could explain this trend? One, we are seeing a return into in-person instruction after the COVID-19 pandemic. As well as that, social media is becoming more of an important thing in educational settings. So we may be seeing a lot of these cases through recordings or information that is being shared on social media platforms. In our Civil Rights Report, we do cover different types of discriminations. Some of those examples are airline discrimination, FBI interrogations, First Amendment, especially in the case of the BDS movement, incarceratory rights, and immigration and asylum. Now, when we talk about these types of discrimination, it's very important that we actually talk about the stories behind these cases, many of which we share in our new Civil Rights Report. To share some, for example, in a case of denial in service. In Massachusetts, a McDonald's employee allegedly discriminated against a Muslim family by putting a large amount of pork bacon in the fish fillet sandwich. When the mom opened the box of fish fillet for her son looked at his mom and said, "Why do they hate us?" Another category that we're seeing a lot of cases for 2022 is anti-mosque incidences. I want to call special attention to something that happened recently in New Jersey, where a truck visited 4 masjids that blamed Islam for the Mumbai attacks of 2008. When CAIR held a press conference to raise awareness for what happened at these masjids, the governor stood in support with the Muslim community, tweeting that support. And in the case of incarceratory rights, last year CAIR had to call on a federal court to impose a $10,000 fine on a Nevada prison for violating a court order to allow Muslim prisoners to congregate in prayer. These are some of the stories behind the data that we see. And it's very important that we humanize this data to understand the lived experiences of Muslims today. In light of these findings, it's important that we also promote some recommendations for both our public officials and community leaders to take in light of this data. To call attention to some of the recommendations, one I would like to call special attention to is that banks should end the wrongful targeting of American Muslims, Arabs, and Persian families. As we detail in one of the special sections of our report, CAIR has for a number of years received complaints about bank closures with no explanation at all. Now, CAIR has worked in collaboration with the National Iranian American Council, which has led a great effort to figure out what is going on and publish a memo regarding this. In the memo, they detail, for example, that students will be removed from financial support when they need that money for college. Some cases included that friends were cut off their bank accounts simply for paying each other back for Iranian food. Now, what could explain this case? Well, you see, the Patriot Act passed in 2002 imposed a broad mandate that made bank closures only enforceable through national heritage. Now, we're not alone for calling for this recommendation. Just recently, there was a joint letter issued by some lawmakers in Congress, some of them being Representative Ilhan Omar and Senator Elizabeth Warren, in which they call on the Biden administration and heads of all U.S. banking regulations to update sanction policies to protect and promote equitable banking access for Muslims and immigrants community. Now, the letter even goes further to talk about how these individuals and even charities have been victims of discriminatory policies that limit their access to financial services because of their religion or national heritage. Another recommendation I would like to call attention to is that the FTC should combat the unfair and deceptive practices of the data location industry. As we detail in another special section in our report, there has been a secret harvesting of Muslim location data from very popular apps. Some of those apps include Muslim Pro, which a lot of Muslims turn to remember the prayer times of that day. The other one being Muslim Mingle, which is a very popular dating app within the Muslim community. Now, in 2022, the U.S. Special Operations Command admitted to purchasing location data from users from those two apps. Now, location surveillance has been something that disproportionately affected the Muslim community for far too long because it facilitates a warrantless surveillance and it violates the First Amendment freedom of assembly, as well as the Fourth Amendment through the right of privacy against unreasonable searches. Another recommendation that we'd like to call attention to which we have seen a lot of progress in, is that states should take action to enshrine religious sports attire inclusion into law. Now, as we have detailed in another special section of our report, last year we have seen wonderful progress in states' legislators in Maryland and Ohio, and in 2021 in Illinois. Now, we're calling on states to implement similar legislations because these states, Maryland, Ohio, or Illinois, can serve as legislative templates or models for other states to follow. And what is important to note is that this has been a battle by young Muslim students. For example, I want to call special from a track meet because she was wearing a hijab. It's important that we pass legislation like this because it not only benefits Muslim students, but students of all faiths. For the other recommendations, we highlight them in our civil rights report and what public officials can do moving forward. With that said, I would like to pass it now off to Zaina Galawanji, who will be presenting a new update regarding the leak watch list from 2019.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and Ramadan Mubarak. My name is Zaina Galawanji, and I'm a CAIR attorney. Before I go into what is on the slide, I want to give you some background information. So what is the watch list? The watch list is essentially a government database of individuals who are known or suspected terrorists. The definition is really vague, and the people who are on the list are not necessarily terrorists and have not necessarily committed a crime. And so knowing that there's this list that's meant to supposedly target terrorism by placing people on it in order to monitor them, what are the chances of this becoming a Muslim registry? Very high. And that's what this is. This is a government database that has disproportionately impacted the American Muslim community. A hacker recently gained access to copies of 2 subsets of the terror watch list and publicly reported summaries confirmed that the watch list is a Muslim registry. We worked with data analysis experts and have finally put a number to the names. That number is 98.3%. 98.3% of the names on the 2019 leaked watch lists are identifiably Arabic or Muslim names. This is the first time that we've been able to put a number to the names on the watch list, but it's only reinforced what the FBI has already admitted to, that it considers race, ethnicity, nationality, and religion when it decides whether to watch list someone. So this slide depicts 50 most common names found on the watch lists. So you'll see there's a lot of Muhammads, Mahmouds. These are Arabic and Muslim names. And watchlisted individuals experience terrible, terrible things. They're not given any notice or explanation of their placement, and they only realize that something is terribly wrong after they experience a series of terrible things. So people on the watch list have enormous difficulties traveling both domestically and internationally. They might be prohibited from flying, denied licenses, permits, government clearances, denied employment or terminated from their jobs, denied visas and citizenship, or harassed by law enforcement. The biggest indicator to us of whether someone might be watchlisted is when you go to the airport and you get your boarding pass printed out, and it'll have SSSS printed on the boarding pass. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're watchlisted. It could be random, but every single person who is on our watchlist lawsuits has that occurring for them. So be on the lookout for that when you're traveling in airports. To date, the government doesn't confirm to a person that they're on the watch list. They don't tell the person in advance. You might find out that you've been watch listed after you experience these terrible things. If you suspect that you might be watch listed and you learn about this process called DHS TRIP, it's basically a complaint process that's supposedly meant to remedy this issue. But people who file the DHS TRIP complaint get a vague letter that will neither confirm nor deny placement. So you never really know if you're watch listed, and you don't have a meaningful opportunity to contest it if you're on it. The government will tell people if they're on a no-fly list, but that happens after the person has already gone to the airport, is denied boarding on an airplane. If they're lucky, an airline representative will say, hey, you've been denied boarding because you're on the no-fly list. Somehow the person will find out that DHS TRIP exists and files a complaint with the government, and they will get a letter saying that they're on the no-fly list, but there won't be any meaningful information on it, nor a real opportunity trip. And he got a letter back saying that he was no-fly listed. And what resulted was FBI agents demanded that he come to an FBI field office where he submitted to a polygraph interrogation. And during the interrogation, he was accused of associating with terrorists, even though he hadn't. And an FBI agent told him that she would feel terrible if she went home without getting a confession out of him. So that's what we've seen with that process. People who are watchlisted, their family members may face consequences. So if you travel with somebody who is watchlisted, you will experience this type of harassment at the airport, even if you yourself are not watchlisted. So we've seen that children and babies have also been subjected to this kind of harassment at airports, that there have been babies who have had their bags searched. Sometimes there are children with names that match up to somebody who is on the watch list. I actually met somebody who was prevented from flying when he was 9 years old because his name matched with somebody who was on the no-fly list. So we have several lawsuits across the country challenging the watch list, and we filed these lawsuits on behalf of real people who are negatively impacted by the watch list. So our clients include like an imam who wants to lead his community to Hajj and Umrah, but he's discouraged from doing so because people who travel with him are also going to be harassed because he's watchlisted. Many of our clients have reported being intimidated by CBP officers to provide access to their cell phones and laptops, and CBP will sometimes take the electronics and download the information from it. We have a client who was stopped by police officers on the highway. He had 8 officers approach his car with guns aimed at him, yelling conflicting instructions at him, until he finally was instructed to step out of his car, walk backwards with his hands up, and they handcuffed him. And we know the situation could have been much worse. Our goal is to ensure that American Muslims are no longer harassed by the government's watchlisting practices and policies. And we were able to obtain a favorable ruling in federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia, where a judge did say that these practices and policies were unconstitutional. We're going to continue filing in lawsuits across the country until the government finally does something about this watch list.
Very good. Thank you very much, Zaina and Amar, for presenting all that information to everyone. So what we wanted Zaina and Amar to do is just give you the immediate insights into the findings of the report and tell you a little bit about the human stories behind that, right? When we give you the data, that's one thing, but recognizing that each time we talk about one of these complaints that we get, there is a real human who is experiencing oftentimes very real harm. Always important to keep that particular thing in mind. What we're going to do now is we're going to invite into our conversation a couple of experts to help us get some insight and understanding into what all this data means. So if we can bring in our guests, please, I'll go ahead and start introducing them. Dr. Hatem Bazian is the founder and director of the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project. Hatem, good to see you. Welcome.
Welcome. Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be with you.
And Dalia Mogahed is the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. Dalia, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Hatem, let's start with you. You've heard the data. You've had a chance to look at the report in advance, and sitting where you sit at the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project, what thoughts do you have?
Well, assalamu alaikum. And first, let me congratulate you, Corey, and your team at CAIR for the progress in the Shadow of Prejudice report. CAIR has been putting these reports since 2015, and we partnered with you, Corey, at that time. And it's really to testament to the effort and the work of CAIR nationally and CAIR across the country that continues to be the go-to and primary avenue for people to report on a variety of discriminatory cases involving Muslims. And this report, it's an added element for me as an educator on Islamophobia. My students are going to receive both reports and the analysis of the no-fly list as well as this report. As the data shows, we have, again, the yin and yang, the positive and the negative. While we're seeing this reduction of cases from previous year, a 38% drop in complaints to law enforcement. But I think this also points to the shift from, as you mentioned, from the Democrat to a Republican. But what I want to say is that the 63% increase in school is significant. And my view of it is that the site of cultural contestation have shifted. That now public schools, curriculum, especially the whole debate and discussion in the country on critical race theory, and the debate even here in California about the model ethnic studies curriculum, have shifted the boundaries into looking at schools as the site of Islamophobic intervention and Islamophobic discourse in that sense. So I think the data of the 63 cases, 63% bullying, as well as other elements of harassment at the school, I think this points to this broader debate that is taking place. The other elements in relation to the report, I think it is very important that these are still there, violations of dietary needs for prisoners, the employment discrimination, FBI, all these are normative cases that is still there. But I still believe that we're touching only the tip of the iceberg. 5,156 cases is still, I would say, an underreporting. And as possibly those who work on reporting with the Muslim community, most of our community does not report. We saw this from the survey that the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley has conducted. While most Muslims believe that Islamophobia is a real problem, above 90th percentile of Muslims don't report the incidents. So you almost have a complete divergence between recognizing the problem being serious and then going to the next level of actually reporting, which for us who engage in this is really sometimes pulling teeth of actually getting the individuals to recognize Islamophobic incidents. They do not have to be hate crimes for it to be an Islamophobic incident. And I think that's part of educating individuals that Islamophobia takes many different manifestations. One of the manifestation is verbal. In my classes, often I just ask my Muslim students if anyone of you have heard the following statements in your daily affairs, and literally over 70% of the students would raise their hand that they experience verbal Islamophobia. And in the survey that we did, even during COVID, a larger segment, over 45% of those who were surveyed, said that they experienced verbal Islamophobia during COVID. This is basically when people were still in the house, they were experiencing some Islamophobic discourses. Part of us who work on this field, we need to educate and engage in educating our community of how to report on what is constitute Islamophobic incident versus what constitute a hate crime incident. And in the terms of the hate crime, I do still believe that the FBI is under-reporting and under-following the cases of hate crimes pertaining to Muslim. Part of the challenge is many cities, many regions in the country do not have a mandated reporting. And I think if there's one of the interventions for us to actually push for making sure reporting and identifying Islamophobic hate crimes as such and following it accordingly. And this requires both a legislative work, but also civil society outreach and education to partners and allies to understand the significance of why we need hate crime legislations in the different jurisdictions. Because if half of the country is not reporting, then half of the country, we're missing half of the country of hate crimes. And since Muslims are doubly or triply marginalized, the hate crime directed at them don't end up being reported. The last piece, and I want to hear Dalia's comments as well, is that I always had, or many times I had the 4 S's, which I say that I'm extra, extra, extra special person in getting into the airport. And in one of my classes, I actually begin the class on surveillance of Muslims and no-fly zone by going to the COINTELPRO and going through the Church Commission files, because the collection of data and information about politically objectionable, as J. Edgar Hoover have articulated, is something that has been part of our country for a long period of time. And now, as the shift toward the Muslims as the demonized other, we should actually push further and reconstitute and call for our congressional leadership is actually to push for a similar type of a commission, similar to the Church Commission, to actually investigate the violation of Muslim civil rights as a class in this country. Again, the data is about 98% plus of correspondence with the list with Muslims shows that the Muslims are the primary target, which often jokingly I say that while traveling, I ask the TSA to thank me because being a Muslim is a stimulus to the economy because they got the job, in essence, as a result of this hyper-structural Islamophobia within our society. So I think this is an important case for us to demand specific and national attention on the violation of Muslim civil rights en masse, with the data of over 1 million plus that are on this watch list, no-fly list. So, but congratulations on this report, and definitely it is added to the scholarship and work from community on racism, discrimination, and civil rights of Muslims in America. Thank you.
We appreciate those insights, Hatem, and certainly a few things I'd like to unpack with you, but I definitely want to bring Dalia in at this point. Dalia, given the set of expertise that you sit on in particular, can we just get your thoughts and reactions to what you saw in this year's report?
Thank you so much, Corey, and Ramadan Kareem. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for tuning in and discussing this very important report. I want to echo what Dr. Bazian said about congratulating all of you for this incredibly critical work that you've been doing now for so many years. And that's such a value to the community to be able to actually even say we're going up or going down in reported incidents. So I wanted to come into this conversation from the perspective of the research we do at ISPU, which isn't to collect incidents, but it's to do systematic surveys of American Muslims year after year. And we've been surveying Muslims as, you know, a scientific representative survey of American Muslims since 2016. And we developed something we call the Islamophobia Index. And what that is a measure of public endorsement for anti-Muslim tropes, a set of 5 key anti-Muslim tropes that we found and other researchers have found. When you endorse them, you are more likely to also support anti-Muslim policies. So what I was intrigued by was this dip in reported incidents, 23% decline. And we've seen a similar decline in the Islamophobia Index in the general public. Not huge, but a decline nonetheless. And it's been happening year after year. We, you know, believe it or not, even during the Trump administration, a slight decline. And then after he left office, a more measurable decline in the percentage of the public, and this is, you know, even groups like white evangelicals, a decline in the likelihood of their endorsement of anti-Muslim tropes. However, that's the good news. Similar to this, there's a glimmer of hope. The bad news is there's one group in our research that has gone up in their Islamophobic views. And that group are Muslims themselves. And so why I bring this up is because when I saw that there was an increase in school incidents, it made me wonder if it might have something to do with this data point of a steady, slow, and then fast increase in Muslim endorsements of their own stereotyping, of their own demonization, especially among young people. And we've also seen, you know, when we look at a representative survey of American Muslims, that bullying is a huge problem. American Muslim families with children in school, K through 12 school, a full half of them say that their child has been bullied at some frequency in the past year for being a Muslim, higher than any other faith community. And what's more, similar to what CAIR found, sometimes the bully is the teacher, a third of the time. In fact, it's an adult presenting or speaking against bullying the child. I mean, presenting anti-Muslim, you know, educational material is a type of bullying of that child, in a far more harmful way when it comes from an authority figure. So there might be a connection, and we're still trying to fully understand this internalized Islamophobia problem, between this steady drumbeat of bullying and negative information being presented as education, and our own children and our own young people's internalization of their own demonization. So I did want to bring that up as a point of discussion that I think we really need to address as a community. I'm not saying it's CAIR's job to address it, but it is an issue that, you know, our mental health professionals and our imams and so forth, our youth leaders need to be aware of and need to really prioritize. The other point I wanted to just raise as a general observation is oftentimes when we talk about Islamophobia in sort of our community, we we don't recognize all the ways that it manifests. And the largest and most frequent purveyor of Islamophobia is the state, is the government. And we kind of forget that. We think it's, you know, a white supremacist or something, or someone who says something rude to you at the grocery store. All those people, of course, can inflict Islamophobic, you know, acts on you, make your life hard. But where it becomes not just in the hundreds or even the thousand, but in the hundreds of thousands of people being impacted is when it comes from the state. Things like banking while Muslim, which is something that you all pointed to. I'm very happy to see that, because we just released a report where we found that a full quarter of our community, even if we say there are only 3 million of us, if a quarter of us are having problems banking, that's hundreds of thousands of people that are being discriminated against for being a Muslim. Now, when you look at just banking, it's a private institution, but because of a state mandate of fining banks for having any violations of the Patriot Act or material support. So it's just easier for that junior officer to just close your bank down. Or not only if you're an individual, that's a quarter of individuals. And then among them, 67% of those who had a problem are business owners and or nonprofit heads who had their bank account either closed, suspended, had some problem with it. And so it's not just the quarter of us who are having the problem ourselves, but all of the people who are businesses or our nonprofits are servicing or employing that are being impacted. So the problem is so much bigger than 5,000 incidents or even 10,000 incidents. It's in the hundreds of thousands, and the biggest purveyor of Islamophobia is the state. And I think this is a very important point to always point to, so we don't get distracted or we don't sort of lose sight of what we really need to be doing in terms of all the things CAIR does, advocacy and litigation and so forth. So those were my thoughts on the report, and congratulations once more.
So thank you very much as well. The research you all did on banking while Muslim was amazing. I have lots of questions for all of you. I'm not seeing any coming in from our guests, so I'm just going to use moderator's privilege, and I'm going to pose one question to the four of you. I find that while we see optimism in this report, right? We see some optimism in total overall cases dropping, the total number of government cases dropping as well. And then there's, some bad news, very bad news about the student cases going up for sure. And then, the finally being able to put a number to the percent of names, 98.3, that identify as Muslim on the watch list. That's very disconcerting. But I would say that whenever I talk to people who are in our profession, who are activists professionally, who study these very serious topics professionally, like Islamophobia and other forms of discrimination, we can be a depressing bunch to talk to, because we always have lots of depressing things that we're encountering. So when you look at this report, when you look at your own work, can you, each of you, just take a moment and give the people who are watching this one piece of optimism that you take away from the trends that you're seeing right now in your own data or what you see in this report? And circle back to Amar to start off with that. Amar, what are your thoughts? And if you're stunned because I just asked a bunch of activists to be positive, let me know. But it is what keeps us in our work, right? We deal with a lot of depressing things, but the optimism I find is what drives me to come back to work every day.
And I would speak from my own experience. One of the things, and before I say my answer, I'm going to acknowledge I am biased in terms of this, but it's young people. Going to college, seeing all the young people and their activism and online and everything. Seeing that is very encouraging because I did not see that type of energy and activism even during my time in high school. And I can't really pinpoint where it comes from. Maybe it could be the election of Donald Trump. Maybe it could be the Muslim ban. It could be something. But I am really optimistic to see the future because I'm seeing a lot of these young Muslims increase their activism in a wide variety of political movements, whether that be Black Lives Matter or whether that is Palestinian resistance. It's remarkable to see what is going on, and it keeps me coming back day after day and really make me realize that what we're doing is very meaningful. And it's great to see that there's this growing group of people who are stand behind you. So like I said, I am biased, but I have hope that the future is for the young people.
Very good. Thank you. Speaking as somebody who started this work in 1997, I'm so ready to retire and let you all take over. So welcome to it. Zaina, any optimism?
I will say that from my perspective as an attorney who handles a lot of the employment discrimination work, I have seen from agencies, state or counties, and like big corporations, this kind of push to understand Muslim issues a little bit more and to work on accommodating people better. It's been really interesting because I feel like one year I was just seeing like a lot of overt discrimination and people not willing to take responsibility. And now I'm like seeing like, oh, corporations want CAIR to give presentations about accommodations. Maybe it's because our lawsuits are more so in the media and like these corporations are like trying to avoid liability. But I actually think perhaps things are changing for the better. I don't know why, but they're changing. And I think that's really awesome.
There is no doubt in my mind that the legal savvy and the advocacy savvy of the American Muslim community and its allies has increased enormously over the last 20 years. You have people coming into the industry now who didn't go to school for completely different subjects, but then got into advocacy because it was sort of what they had to do. You have people now who have studied law, studied government. That was what they always wanted to do. And they've worked professionally in litigating firms and lobbying firms and are coming into the movement to now advocate for these people who are being discriminated against. I agree with you. It's amazing. Hatem, thoughts?
Well, I do agree with Ammar about the youth, but also in your report, there's 5,156 Muslims that took the step to report and to be proactive on the problem. That is an evidence that our community is courageous and is confronting the problem head on, that we're not hiding in the margins and shying away. We're actually stepping up. The fact that we have so much research that is coming out, that no longer can someone actually take Islamophobia for granted as a field of study. So there's tremendous research that is coming from across the globe, wide in all different specialization. It's also the fact that you have March 15th now, it's a global day to actually a day recognized by the UN to dedicate to combating Islamophobia. If you are unable to name the hurt and the pain and define how to work around it, you're unable to actually begin to confront it. So again, the fact that you have such a date recognized, no matter how it came about, that date right now is also very positive to organize. And then lastly, I would say that across the various sectors, whether government, education, corporate, private sectors, and so on, all have now engaged Islamophobia. At one level or the other, they have to contend with it. And that's very positive, despite the fact that we are at the forefront of reporting. We're reporting because there are people that are saying that this is happening that needs to be addressed. So I'm very optimistic overall, even though that we're dealing with cases that are pain and suffering of the community.
So very true. And I think sometimes people don't understand the impact that them making that decision to report what happened to them can have. I always remember I got a letter one time. It was in crayon, in different colors and a butterfly drawn on it. And the story was heart-wrenching. This was a little kid who had been pulled aside for a security screening because her name matched someone on the watch list. And what her parents said in a separate letter is that she had gotten so afraid she threw up, and the folks would not give her water to clean her mouth out with. But the little girl in this letter where she told her story, the thing that just struck me was she wrote, "The man from Homeland Security did not say please or thank you." This little girl wrote that letter, and I used that letter for years on Capitol Hill to show people behind the numbers I'm talking about, this is a real human being who really suffered because you guys didn't get it right. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Without the people reporting these things, I can tell you for sure, we at CAIR, we're not able to be anywhere near as effective as we are when we have these human beings helping us out. So Dalia, question to you. What brings you, out of what we've heard today from this report and what you're seeing in your research, are there things that give you optimism?
I think I'm going to echo some of what was already said. What gives me optimism is the heightened awareness and finally the end to, for the most part, Islamophobia denial. I do remember not so long ago where we would say the word or claim that it existed and we would literally be laughed at. People denied its very existence, and now it's something that is documented and it's something that people recognize as an actual problem. I was really happy to see that at our webinar on Banking While Muslim, we had executives from major banks actually attend. That would never have happened, say 15 years ago. So just the fact that there is this heightened awareness, heightened sensitivity and desire on the part of many people in authority for whatever, beneficent or not, self-interested reason. I don't really even care which one. For whatever reason, they feel that it is in their best interest to fix this problem. And that gives me hope.
Something that I agree with you. If we brought up something like Banking While Muslim to particularly executives, even a few years ago, if they knew about it, they would never have acknowledged its existence to us. And for me, when I see someone proactively come to something like the research that you all put together and is willing to engage with it and ask themselves if they can solve that problem, is utterly mind-blowing and is 100% a change from the time that I remember very clearly, and I'm sure many people watching this program remember, when if you asked for help from many other communities, they were too afraid to engage because they didn't want to suffer under the same harm that the Muslim community was being subjected to. So I want to thank you all for that. The report is Progress in the Shadow of Prejudice. You can get it at Islamophobia.org. Download it, take a read of it. Amar and Zaina, thank you so much for presenting the findings to us and for your thoughts. I will end on my piece of optimism and thanking our expert guests. Hatem Bazian, founder and director of the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project. Dalia Mogahed, director of research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I've already sort of given away my age earlier that I started this work a long time ago. There was no academic support for advocacy work when I started in this business. And their two institutions have produced a wealth of material that empower people like me as we go out and we defend people who have been discriminated against. I cannot overstate how much I ask you to support their organizations and their work because they do amazing things. And without them, we are significantly less effective than we are with the work and the research that they have. And the last thing I'll ask you is, if you find this kind of reporting in these human cases that we've been talking about to be important, we'd ask you to consider also supporting CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. It is Ramadan. You all know that very well. We were discussing this morning the influx of cases that we always get during Ramadan on top of the regular work that doesn't stop, right? Hatred and bias doesn't stop because we're observing Ramadan. So there's always this sort of rise in the number of people who need our assistance, and we want to partner with you so that we can be there to provide that assistance. And like Hatem said, report it, please, right? If something happened to you, we'd love to learn about it. So Amar, Zaina, Hatem, Dalia, thank you all very much for your time and for your insights. And folks who are watching, please go ahead and get the report at Islamophobia.org. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ramadan Mubarak.
Assalamu
Thank
alaikum.
you. Assalamu alaikum.